Speaking of Joe Biden, a couple days ago, we commented here that Joe Biden just may be the generic Democrat that always fares better than Joe Biden, the actual candidate, that when the election comes, it happens time and again. Joe Biden is always underestimated. Joe Biden wins. That's what he's been doing since 2020. It's what he's been doing since South Carolina. So I had a reporter call me a couple days ago. He was doing a story. He said, help me out here. What if you had to pick a number that's most important, like if you could know any number on election day, what would it be? Would it be Joe Biden's approval ratings? And I laugh. I go, not even close. Not even close. Because people just sort of like, Joe Biden, no. I said it's irrelevant. It's been irrelevant. It was irrelevant before the so-called red wave, on and on and on. And so yesterday, this reporter calls me back and said, did you see the New Hampshire poll? And I said, no. He said, you should look at it because it proves your point. Here, well, TJ. There you go. So I'm not going to tell you how he's doing in the actual poll, but Joe Biden's approval rating in New Hampshire, a very important state, obviously, one that both candidates, whoever they may be, need to win, only 37%. Now you match them up, though, with the same people that gave him a 37% approval rating, match them up with the election. Okay, TJ, this is where you go. Joe Biden beating Donald Trump by 5 points. And Molly, even if you throw everybody in the kitchen sink in, Joe Biden's still ahead. The point being, okay, people just kind of like to bitch and moan sometimes when they're talking to pollsters. But when it's Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and the swing states that matter the most, they're just going to break for Biden. I'm not whistling past the graveyard. They just are.
Well, we saw this, right? The reason why Biden got the nomination was not because he was the furthest left or even the closest to the middle, was because he seemed the most electable. And we've seen this again and again. Right. You know, he goes into these elections and people say, well, he's boring and we don't get excited about him. We want some other random candidate who's going to get people excited.
The Rock.
Right, The Rock. But the reason why he does well is because people like these democratic ideas and they think and they've seen him enact a lot of that.
They like the democratic ideas. They like freedom for women to have power over their own lives. They like 10-year-old girls having the freedom along with their parents and their clergy and their medical providers to make decisions if they've been raped by illegal immigrants. Donald Trump doesn't. Certainly the United States Supreme Court decision, Dobbs doesn't. And they also, they like what they saw yesterday. A grown-up dealing with grown-up problems. Like, the takeaway for Donald Trump and she in their first meeting was that, I swear to God, Donald Trump, if nobody remembers, said, we had the greatest chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago you have ever had. We had that was his delivery.
It was good, in fairness.
Well, it looked good.
It was the molten where it spills out when you cut into it.
Very moist. Yeah. I get it. I love those type of cakes.
Was that one of the dinners where classified documents were just floating around too? Or I think that was
the Japanese.
Okay, yeah.
Japanese. But when they get it, we laugh about it now. When they get into the voting booth, all of those things we talked about: freedom, maturity, and actually a grown-up dealing with huge crises makes a difference when people walk into a voting booth.
And Donald Trump, it's only going to get worse over the next year. Just think how January isn't going to be just defined by what's happening in the caucus, in the primaries. It's going to be Donald Trump's legal problems are just going to keep being at the forefront. And so I'm really watching. You're talking about the Dobbs decision, let's call them Dobbs dads. And they're those dads who tend to be conservative, and they might still be pro-life, but they don't like that the government has gotten involved to this extent and is going to dictate their daughter's health care. And so that's enough that if Biden can pull those voters, and I think that he probably will after what we saw just, 2 Tuesdays ago or last Tuesday.
And Donald Trump running around bragging that he, quote, terminated Roe v. Wade.
Exactly.
And we saw those Dobbs dads 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago in Kentucky. We saw him in Virginia. We saw him in that ballot initiative in Ohio. Another interesting element of that poll and some others that came out yesterday, John, is that this is for people worried about Joe Biden, is that Donald Trump really is the best opponent for Joe Biden. These other head-to-head matchups, Ron DeSantis leads by more than Donald Trump would. Nikki Haley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Massive lead.
Way ahead.
Over Joe Biden in one national poll. So Donald Trump, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be close. We already know that. But he very well may be the best chance for Joe Biden to be reelected.
And that's sort of always been the case. Even before the 2022 midterms, talking to White House strategists and those who want to get Joe Biden a second term, we're like, well, Donald Trump's the guy we want to see. We want to see. Yeah. We think that's who we're going to see. That's also who we're going to see. And Republicans had that choice. I mean, they still do. No votes have been cast yet. But right now, Trump is up 30, 40% in every single GOP poll. So certainly it looks like it will be him. And the Biden team feels, they know it'll be close, but they feel pretty good about that, in part because they know, just like in 2020, there may not be a groundswell of support for Joe Biden, but there will be a groundswell of support against Donald Trump and for certain issues, particularly abortion rights.
You know, let's just, what is today? What year are we in?
November 16th.
Yeah.
November 16th, 2023. Remember, I said it here.
All right.
On this date, if Biden runs against Trump, and if Biden beats Trump, as I think it will, the conspiracy theorists will say, Donald Trump was on the ropes, and then the Democrats knew they were in trouble, so they started indicting him. Right. And with every indictment, Donald Trump's approval rating in the Republican Party went up.
Right.
And he's now, the latest I saw is he's at 85% when he was down to 55, 60% before the indictments started coming in. That can be your conspiracy theory if you want, but how screwed up to belong to a party that actually rewards a guy for being indicted for stealing nuclear secrets and stealing elections.
But, you know, Republicans have a base problem. Their base controls their party.
Right.
And so that's why Donald Trump is going to be their nominee. And I'm thinking about with this off year election and all of the things that they ran on that were losers besides abortion, book bans, anti-woke, gas stoves.
What do you say? The
trans panic. Right? That your kids are all going to become trans by reading books.
By the way, my favorite illustration of how crazy that is they had this huge fight in Utah.
Right.
It was like, oh my God, these trans athletes are taking over all the women's sports. It's the worst thing in the world. And the governor said, we have 4 students, in the entire state of Utah. Can we try to figure this out and do it with compassion?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, like, guys that transition into being women post puberty should compete against them.
Right.
But we have 4 students. Let's not have a civil war over 4 students. But that's the trans panic.
Yeah.
And they thought that was going to work. Didn't work. Like, taking freedom away from women didn't work. Stealing elections, denying, you're right. It is a base, like Democrats. What do they do with their base?
Yeah.
We'll get back to it in a couple of weeks. I mean, but the Republican base
is running the show.
They run the show.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, the book bans, Moms for Liberty had a really bad night. I mean, all of this stuff is because Republicans cannot control their base. Their base now runs the show. And so you have these crazy ideas being shopped, and Republicans are losing on these ideas. And quite frankly, they should. They're morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
And you know, it's overreach. People don't want the government in their bedroom and in their schools. And they want them.
And yet, there's actually an outfit called Moms for Liberty.
Yes.
Who support freedom being taken away from their daughters.
Yeah.
I think there should be an outfit called Dads for Freedom that says to the government, you know what? We'll take care of our daughter.
Yeah.
Her mother and I will make the decision with our daughter, with healthcare specialists, get out of our lives. And yet, Moms for Liberty? Seriously? Worried about what? Roberto Clemente books?
And you see doctors. I mean, this other thing is that you're undermining doctors, right? You have doctors leaving red states.
Right.
Because they can't practice medicine.
Where there already are not enough OBGYN
Right.
providers in rural communities. So the saying goes, Democrats hate their base, Republicans fear their base. And that's really playing out right now.
Yeah.
And you see, I mean, not the Democrats hating their base as much. I'm not
No,
really
but
gonna
it's
comment on
a
that. That's just the,
pithy
that's just
saying.
kind of, that's the political,
That's
people
a
have been
pithy
saying it a
saying,
long
yeah.
time. But if you look at those New Hampshire polls and just how Nikki Haley would crush she would crush Joe Biden. If the Republican Party actually had a political apparatus that,
If they wanted to win.
did some party control and actually was and would strong arm, but instead you have a political party that each person, top leadership, wants to keep their power
Well, and I was-
not be transplanted by Trump.
Yeah.